Joshua chapter 4, verses 20 through 24. In recent news, there's been a lot of conversation about national monuments. In particular, the conversation has been about those monuments that have honored Confederate soldiers or individuals who owned slaves or are known to have had some racist views. The argument about the significance of removing those statues will go on for some considerable amount of time. Whether they should stay or not stay is not the purpose of our discussion on this evening. However, as we think about statues, today is a significant day in history, especially in the history of Black Americans. On July 14th, 1943, as a result of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, a national monument in an area near Joplin, Missouri, was established to honor George Washington Carver. This is significant for two reasons. Number one, George Washington Carver is the first Black person to be honored in a national monument, and he is also the first honored individual who was not a president. Prior to this time, all other monuments obviously were given to those who were presidents. Many of us are familiar with George Washington Carver and understanding that he had over 300 uses for the peanut. Most people do not understand that George Washington Carver did not, and I repeat, did not make peanut butter. If you want to know who made peanut butter, you have to go to history and look. History tells us that in the ancient Incas and Aztecs, that they had some paste made from peanut butter or peanuts that we could consider peanut butter. In modern history, you would probably look to Marcellus Gilmore Edson of Canada, or to Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, or to Dr. Ambrose Straub, who were known to have created something similar to what we would call peanut butter. But as it relates to Mr. George Washington Carver, he did create over 300 uses of not only the peanut, but he found a number of uses for soybeans, for pecans, for sweet potatoes. And interestingly about him, he refused a job paying about $100,000 a year, or what would be equivalent to about $1 million in our time, from Mr. Thomas Edison. Mr. Edison saw his skill, his talents, his abilities, and asked Mr. Carver to work for him. And Mr. Carver refused to work for Mr. Thomas Edison at even such a great handsome salary, because he felt that Mr. Edison would want to take all of the inventions and make money off of them, whereas Mr. Carver only patented 3 of his inventions. His position was that this was a gift from God, and how could he profit from that gift? And so he saw it as a benefit to humanity. What a great man in the person of George Washington Carver. And this is the day that we celebrate his July 14th, 1943 erection of a statue and monument near Joplin, Missouri in his honor. Speaking of statues and monuments, legacies being left, your attention is called to Joshua chapter 4, verses 20 through 24. And we call your attention there because so often in our prayer calls, we are praying for children, we're praying for grandchildren, we're praying in regards to their choices, to their experiences in the far country, and we are hoping for God's intervention in their lives. Certainly, we understand that parents have done the very best that they could do, and children grow up to be influenced by the enticements of this world and are subject to fleshly desires just the same as the rest of humanity. There are some things that we can do with our children and or grandchildren that can help to perhaps carve out a better future for those who are coming along. In Joshua chapter 4, the people of God were getting ready to go into the promised land. In verses 20 through 24, they were told to lay down some stones as a monument and how that God had blessed the children of Israel to go over the Jordan on dry land. It was understood that their children would one day ask the question, what are these stones for? And the reply was that it would be a monument or a testimony to what God had allowed them to do. Why would God insist on such a monument? Why would this statute, or those 12 statues in this case, be important? Because just as we behold George Washington Carver or other individuals who have monuments or statues erected in their honor, there is something they've done, something significant in their life that is deemed important enough that those in the future need not forget. As a result, we consider this passage of Scripture as we talk about how to make sure that we build monuments to God with regards to our children and our grandchildren. Let me suggest to you that you need not go to Joplin, Missouri, or get a presidential endorsement to make a statue to God. Neither are you being encouraged to erect a physical statue in the sense of what we understand a monument to be. But there are three types of monuments that you can make that will certainly help to make sure that those coming after you will have some semblance of who God is. Number one, we need a talking monument. And what I mean by a talking monument is think about the things that you say in your household. How much can God be heard coming from your lips to those who are coming after you? Do we talk about God at home, or do we just wait and go to church and only talk about Him there? How much are we talking about God versus how much are we talking about those folk at the church, the preacher, the members, all of the individuals, all of the experiences? Sometimes we do a greater damage to the cause of God from the negative things that children and grandchildren can hear us saying in regards to them church folk or those church folk. We need to have opportunities and occasions where we're talking about God in the home. When was the last time you and your children or grandchildren prayed together? When was the last time you had a discussion about what they understand or don't understand from the Sunday sermon? When was the last time in having a talking session have you talked about those things that are relevant in their lives and applying a biblical principle to how they are to respond to life's realities? Not only should we have a talking monument, but we need a testimony monument. The difference in the talking and the testimony is that the talking deals with the current experiences and the current relevance of God in their lives. But how often have you shared a testimony about what God has done in your life? Remember from Joshua chapter 4 that the stones were to be a testimony or a reminder, not about the present, but about what God has done in the past. Too often, church, the Bible, God, biblical principles seem so out of touch and so irrelevant because we are seldom talking and testifying about what God has done in our real lives, and we've only mentioned, if that, about what God has done in the Bible, Our children and grandchildren need a bridge that see that the God who worked in the Bible is also the God who worked in our lives, so that when they go through things, they will remember our testimonies and be able to come to their senses and apply a God principle based off of the idea that they not only heard a God story, but they heard a God testimony from our lives. And then we need a tradition monument. And that is, what are the traditions of our homes? Do we ever turn off the television and open the Bible? Do we ever again pause and pray? How do we go about reinforcing the idea of God? As a minister, I have often been alarmed, been surprised, been baffled by members who have come to me and who have said, "Brother Preacher, my child or my grandchild is of age. I need you to make sure they get baptized." Or it is sometimes a complaint. "Brother Gibbs, my child is 16 years old and the Sunday school teacher must not be doing their part, or the Bible school teacher must not be doing their part because they've not gotten baptized yet." How is it that a minister or a teacher who spends 2, 3, 4 hours a week with your child has more influence than you when that child lives in your home and certainly spends more time in your home? Therefore, we must consider that setting up good Bible traditions and good godly traditions is not the responsibility of the preacher or the Sunday school teacher or Bible class teacher, but should be traditions by way in which we govern our homes. I cannot promise you that you will get the outcomes you desire with your children or grandchildren, but I can say that you stand a far greater chance of getting a better outcome when you build some talking monuments, when you are testifying and building monuments to testimonies about God working in your life, and when you have some God traditions. Often we wait until our children are in the devil's hand before we want to introduce them to God. Since we spoke about Mr. George Washington Carver, let me give you this quote from him that I thought was so appropriate in considering how we approach life. He says, "How far you go in life depends on your being tender with the young, compassionate with the aged, sympathetic with the striving, and tolerant of the weak and the strong, because someday in life you will have been all of these." This has been another edition of A Few Minutes with the Minister, with words from the Master.